My name is Tamara Schenkenberg. I'm a curator here at the Pulitzer Arts Foundation, and it is my pleasure to warmly welcome you to today's event. And I'm especially thrilled to welcome these two remarkable artists to the stage, Anita Fields and Faye HeavyShield. And it is really an honor to have you here with us today. Thank you so much, and thank you so much too for bringing your work to St. Louis. Faye HeavyShield's exhibition Confluences is currently on view here at the Pulitzer Arts Foundation through August 6th. And the work by Anita Fields is exhibited as a part of Counterpublic, a triennial civic exhibition that weaves contemporary art into the life of St. Louis. And for that project, Fields worked closely with the curator, Risa Puleo, who I'm also pleased to welcome to today's conversation. The work that HeavyShield and Fields are now presenting in St. Louis are intimately tied to histories and sites of the region. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that this land on which we gather today is the ancestral territory for a lineage of indigenous peoples, including the Mississippian civilization, Osage Nation, and the members of the Alina Confederacy, including the Peoria tribe of Oklahoma, among others. We honor their continued presence here, as well as a broad diversity of Native peoples who now live and work in St. Louis. And we also want to acknowledge the brutal history of forced relocations, cultural erasure, and genocidal practices aimed at indigenous people, and recognize that those legacies shape our present-day responsibilities. And before we turn the conversation to Anita and Faye, Risa and I wanted to briefly introduce their practices. So I'll start with Faye. Faye HeavyShield is one of the leading First Nations artists in Canada and has inspired generations of artists through her work as an artist and mentor. She's a member of the Kainai, or Blood Nation, which is a part of the Blackfoot Confederacy, with ancestral territory in southern Alberta, where she continues to live and work. During a career that spans more than 30 years, HeavyShield has created drawings, sculptures, and installations that draw upon her family histories, as well as Kainai stories and Blackfoot language. The spare power of the prairie landscape of her home community informs HeavyShield's poetic, often minimalist forms and use of humble materials. HeavyShield has exhibited widely across North America in solo and group shows, and just last week, her retrospective, The Art of Faye HeavyShield, curated by Felicia Gay, traveled to its second venue, the Winnipeg Art Gallery. And just yesterday, HeavyShield unveiled her project at the St. Louis Art Museum. This is the latest iteration of SLAM's Native Artists Collaboration Series, where artists relate historic works from the collection to contemporary indigenous ways of seeing. And I want to acknowledge SLAM's curator, Alex Marr, for his work on this series, and just encourage you all to visit the Danforth Gallery for Plains Art to see Faye's installation there, which will be on view for some time. And just a brief mention of what's to come. As a recipient of the 2021 Gershon Iskowitz Prize, HeavyShield will also show next year at the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto, so she's busy and we all look forward to that. And now, on to Anita.
Thank you, Tamara. So my name is Risa Puleo, and I'm here representing Counterpublic, and was really honored to be able to work with Anita Fields and her son, Ngozi, on a beautiful installation near Sugarloaf Mound, which I hope you all have the opportunity to see. So a little bit about Anita. Anita Fields was born in Oklahoma and creates works of clay and textile that reflect the worldview of her native Osage culture. Her practice explores the complexity of cultural influence and the intersections of balance and chaos found within our lives. The early Osage notion of duality, such as earth and sky, male and female, are represented in her work. Fields creates narratives that ask viewers to consider the ways of seeing and being in an effort to understand our shared experiences. The power of transformation and transformative actions are realized by creating various forms of clothing, covering, and figurative forms. And her work reflects time, place, and how the earth holds the memory of cultures who once called a specific terrain home. Fields' work has been featured in American Craft, Ms. Magazine, American Style, and First American Art. Her work can be found in several collections, such as the Minneapolis Institute of Art, the Museum of Art and Design, New York City, Museum of Contemporary Native Arts, Santa Fe, Crystal Bridges in Bentonville, Arkansas, the Heard Museum in Phoenix, and the National Museum of American Indian at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And she is currently a fellow at the Kaiser Foundation Tulsa Art Fellowship. So please, everybody, join me in welcoming Anita and Faye. So I was invited to St. Louis 3 years ago and immediately met Tamara on my first visit. And so in that practice of putting Counterpublics together, Tamara and I have been in constant conversation about how we could collaborate. Knowing that she was working on this exhibition of Faye HeavyShield's work and that I would be working with Anita, we thought this would be an amazing opportunity to bring these two artists, Native women artists, who have had extremely long and prolific careers together. And then we learned that they've actually known each other for decades. So one of the first questions that we want to ask you is, how did you first meet each other, and how did you become aware of each other's work?
Do you want to start? Good start. I don't know if I should just put this back on and keep it like that. Do you want this one?
Yeah, are they already on?
I'll let you do.
Easier.
Okay.
So Faye and I met many years ago in Canada at the Banff Art Center, International Art Center, and we were both there as residents in an Indigenous residency that was from Indigenous cultures all over the world. And it was, we were brought together by curators, Margaret Archuleta, Leanne Martin, Brenda Croft, and there was this one. Megan.
I don't know how to pronounce her
Yeah,
last
I don't
name.
remember either. But the foresight of these women as curators to make sure that, you know, meeting other artists that you probably would never be able to meet unless you were put in that situation, you know, to me is very, has a lot of foresight because of the importance of being able to meet like-minded people and share our experiences as Indigenous people. So that is where I first became aware of Faye's wonderful work. And we would also have, you know, there was times where we met once a week, you know, for talks and everybody sharing their work and curators talks. And Faye and I felt like we had a shared influences, inspirations, you know, when we started talking about our work. And so that is how we first met.
It was a really unique, I guess, gathering of artists from all over Australia, New Zealand, Northern Mexico, the U.S., of course, and Canada. And so there was a real mix of disciplines, I guess, and origins. And it was really early on that when we really felt the connect. You were there with your son, and then my grandkids were coming on weekends. So right off the bat, it was, I guess, a recognition of those shared, those commonalities of family and our language, our community. So that was the start of it.
And we'll talk a little bit about the work you created, but just in terms of your approach, Risa and I wanted to just acknowledge that, Anita, you are Osage and you have deep ancestral ties to this region. Faye, you've described yourself as a guest here and a visitor, and you had a very different sort of starting point with the environment and the sites that you responded to. So if you could just take turns, just sort of bringing us to that first moment when you were invited to do Counterpublic and when you visited the sites of Cahokia and the confluence here, just what was your relationship in that moment to the land, and how did you start?
I think I mentioned early on in our conversations is that I really hold dear to that respect of a person's place as a guest. And a lot of our culture is, it acknowledges that when, like, I know when people visit our home, my mom would be up clanking pots and pans and cooking, or even if it was just tea, but you made people feel that hospitality and how much weight you put on their presence in your home. And so on the flip side, it's also been very important to me to maintain that awareness of the guest, the role of the guest. So when I did get here, it was I was pretty much in awe of everything I was seeing, and the people that you introduced me to, and meeting Carol and Jim and learning more about the community here, but most of all visiting Cahokia. It was not to use the word in like a religious sense, but it felt so holy, it felt so sacred. And the feeling that, that the people that were there were still there. And the knowledge of all those people, their everyday activities. And so if that wasn't big enough, then seeing the rivers, I had never been to, to see the Mississippi, the Missouri. It really had a huge impact on me, and I really thank you as my host, land-wise.
Anita, do you want to
Sure.
describe your relationship to St. Louis and this region? You're based in Oklahoma, but of course.
Yeah. Well, I can certainly relate to what you said in the beginning as a guest, and it's not unusual for our communities to make friends all over North America and beyond, and visit each other. And it's like Faye said, a really high honor to be able to visit somebody, or have them come to your home and visit you and witness things, witness ceremonies, witness rituals. And so it's a real high honor when that kind of thing happens within your community. And I'm very grateful to Risa for the invitation to be able to make work here in our original homeland. And for those of you who don't know, St. Louis and most of Missouri are our original homelands as Osage people, as we call ourselves Wajaji. And for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, we resided here. Our philosophies, our worldview, the way that we look at the world, these thoughts were shaped here in this area, and they still guide us as Osage people today, even though we have been removed from this homeland and are now in current-day Oklahoma. So the opportunity to make work that would be here, and then as further conversations went along, it would be in close proximity to Sugarloaf Mound, made it even more emotional and deeper kind of feeling for me. And I collaborated with my son, Ngozi, who's a musician and sound artist. and he described it too as being very emotional, because you're bringing up all these issues and things that happened so long ago but still affect us as Native people. And we left this area due to a series of treaties and the thought of manifest destiny and Western movement, and just kept being pushed further and further and further till finally we were at the Kansas border and made our way into Indian Territory with 39 other tribes, which was actually kind of recognized as being a holding pen because people had been removed from their original homelands. And so this opportunity to make this work felt, so near and dear to my heart, and a responsibility to do it with as much respect to our ancestors and our relatives who lived here. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was help to bring awareness to the general public that probably have no idea about these things that I'm talking about how this was our original homeland. And so I wanted to create a piece that reflected, this piece is called Way Back, and it recognizes two things. It's that these ideas and worldviews and thoughts were created way back, because sometimes at home, if we recognize something or we see something, we would go, that's really old, or that's from way back there, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And so that idea, but also our way back, coming back to this homeland and being able to create work that is reflective of our time here. So, and this was not just, this was lots of conversations with Risa and my son and other people, and so, I talk about my work sometimes in terms of many hands touched this, many thoughts, created it. It wasn't just, and that's really what we have to do in order to help one another, is support one another. So Risa actually made a lot of those dreams come very true. And so these are platforms. They're platforms. There's 38 platforms that are made out of wood, and they are embellished with Osage designs from our ribbon work patterns. And I could talk all day about this topic. I know we don't have time to do that, but we were also our interactions with the French through trade also changed. We changed dramatically as a people during our time here in St. Louis and this area. So these platforms are actually platforms that you find in our communities, in the Osage communities today, and have been used for many years. They're not on their own, like a ceremonial item or anything like that connected to that kind of ritual, but they are just placed within camps where people go to attend ceremonies or our ceremonial dances. And you'll find them just outside of homes where people can rest before they go to a feast or before they go to a dinner. And actually, one of my most fondest memories was when I was a young girl. I went around with my grandmother to Osage events and social events all the time. And I just remember older people sitting on these, putting their Pendleton blanket down and sitting on it, and they might have a glass of tea, and they'd be having a cigarette, and they'd be laughing, and they'd be teasing one another, and they'd be visiting. So I'm thinking about memory. I'm thinking about collective memory and how our memory is still related to this place. And that, my feeling as an artist and as a Wajaji person is that this land still holds that memory forever. And I know, when you go a certain place and you have that feeling of the people who were there before, this is, what I'm hoping to invoke when people visit this place.
Faye, do you, maybe with some specificity, if you could talk about one of the works you created in response to St. Louis? Not sure if you have a preference.
Maybe the mounts.
Okay.
So I think right from the start, I wanted to have as little of my hand or my print on it. I wanted it to be all about Cahokia. And so another consideration was that, like I was learning things along the way through our conversations. So these mounds, I wanted them to be biodegradable, of a biodegradable material. And another consideration was the color. And that was one of the first things that struck me when I was, coming into the city, was the color of the brick. And of course, brick, coming from the land, and I felt a really strong recognition too, because I use this color quite a bit in my work. And so that was, I thought of it also. There was one aspect of it that I hope, and I still hope for, and I spoke to someone at the Luminary about this at one of the initial meetings, and even just the other day, is that I would like for there to be a participatory element to this once it stops being here. I'm hoping that, especially youth, because, they are the hope. I'm hoping, what I was envisioning was that maybe these could be given to community members, and that they would have their own personal relationship or their story with one of these mounds, and not in a public way, but in their own way, to really personally acknowledge Cahokia and honor Cahokia, and for these mounds to make their way back into the ground. So I still really hope for that. And there's, I don't know if it's that visible, but there's a line drawing at the top, and that that had sort of, I guess, evolved from a few different things that I wanted to convey. What I learned later was just as prominent, I guess, as the mounds were these borrow pits. And to me, that really spoke of that, of the people's respect for the earth, that it wasn't, when that mound was built, that was just, that was it. And so that it was woven together with, the borrow pit was as much a part of the topography as the mound was.
Borrow is in B-O.
Yeah,
R-O-W.
yeah. And at one point I was thinking burrow, like, rabbits, I don't know, what do I know? But that was a really important thing that I learned was, and so it made a difference. And so the drawing on the wall is in red ochre, Conte. And so that was one of the things that I wanted. And when I started looking at that, I knew that just this line, it felt like, when you get your EKG or whatever the test is at the hospital, and it shows your heart rate, or so those are the things that I didn't go into it deciding that, but that was something that the idea, and I want to be humble about it, but maybe that's what Cahokia, that was a gift, that it occurred to me to have to convey that heartbeat of that community. I really, I put a lot of feeling into it, and really, I know, trying to be Well, like I said, not to burden it with too much of what I thought it was about it. So it was really basically the sense that I was feeling about it, and just to leave it as open-ended for people to maybe to want to know more about that story, and to honor it, as well as to honor it the way it should be. So that's it for my process on that work.
Thank you so much for that, Faye. I wanted to pick up on something you were saying about redistributing to the community, because that's also an important part of your practice, which leads me to another question about how you've both spoken about how the essence of your practice is rooted in your relationship to your communities, to your respective nations, and I wanted to open it up to see if you could talk about how that connection informs your work.
Well, I also just wanted to make a comment when you were talking that I think it's really interesting how, your recognition of the mound and then the borough, and that our, how our ancestors recognized our ideas and our philosophies about the relationship between the earth and the sky and all of the natural elements, and made this visual, to where they were specifically at. And so these are these points for us to be able to look at in terms of this isn't just a mound, this isn't just, dirt piled upon each other, mm-hmm. That it's somebody's actual philosophy of how they look at how they are placed within the world. And so very early landscape art, land-specific art, and it's really beautiful. And that it still exists is so wonderful, mm-hmm. For us to be able to think about. And as Risa said, these platforms are going to return to the Osage community when this exhibition is over. We're still trying to start working on that right now about how that's going to start taking place. But I feel like that's important because it's this actual, as things start, as an artist, when you're making things, it's just like you're just in that process. And I have this amount of time to get this done. And so you can't kind of fully think of everything at the same time. And so now that I've had time to visit it a couple of times and have time to process it, basically, I'm seeing this as, coming full circle, as the wooden platforms were fabricated here. The clay platforms I made in Oklahoma and brought them here, and then they're going to go back to Oklahoma. So it's really kind of mirroring our journey as Osage people. And community is really important in my work. It's actually where I draw probably most of my largest inspirations. And I'm just interested in kind of the everyday, I observe a lot as an artist and watch people's interactions with one another. I'm really curious, when I attend even social events about kind of, Faye and I've had this conversation before about the essence of who we are, kind of bringing things down to the essence of that. And it gives me great joy and comfort to know that we are still practicing things that actually the ideas originated in this area. And although my work is very contemporary, that is what drives it, is just the everyday things that I notice. Or if I notice, something, it can be actually just a visual with your body, or how your hand is held during a certain time of the day. And I know that was, that comes from, I don't even know how long ago. And that's what brings me great comfort and joy. And being able to make those expressions as an artist is really important to me, because I think, the one thing that, when she was reading my statement about wanting people to understand that there's more than one way of looking at the world, I believe that that's overlooked so many times. And I'm real interested in people understanding that our indigenous cultures are very complex and very, very beautiful. And although there has been a lot of tragedy and stories related to our histories, this is still alive. You know, we're still here. And so those are the kinds of things that, you know, when I think about community, all the kinds of things that are still in place. So.
When you were talking about how the, you know, the platforms were built here, material here, and then the clay was from, and its return to its place of origin. I really feel that's a beautiful reciprocity, and that's really indicative of indigenous philosophies all over. You know, it's how we survived in the past. We took care of each other, and it wasn't hoarding. It was sharing with clans, with family. So I really, really thought that's beautiful what you said. I feel the same way about, you know, I spent a lot of my time as an observer, and it's, I think for me, the process of making art, I've always wanted it to be felt as ordinary, that art can be ordinary. And I don't mean that as like mundane, but not something that's precious or, you know, only validated by a certain step along the way. Right from, you know, the seed, the concept, that's fed by so many things. And those things for me are, you know, just every day, what you see in the morning when you step outside, or you hear somebody say something, you hear your own language. In everything, I think that is something that is so rich in what we can reference and what we can use and what can feed the work. So in that sense, that I really hold true that art, for me, it can be, and it should be an ordinary thing that is part of your every day, from the morning to when you go to bed, when you dream. So.
Faye, if I could just get you to talk a little bit more, thinking about community more expansively. I know that your practice has included community art projects, and you've talked about working with the Sissiwin Art Collective in Edmonton on a Shaw's project with Indigenous youth to create works that honors women that they personally knew whose life were lost to violence. And until recently, you also worked with social services in your community with foster children. And I just wondered if you could speak about this part of your life and also how you see it part of your visual practice at large.
One of the first things I realized when I started, and it was just by chance that, like, I've been living in the community, and this new program had just started within Children's Services, with the target, you know, being Blood Tribe children and youth who are now in foster care. And so one of the first things I realized was that as a person who had attended residential school and seeing where these children and these youth were, it was that the residential school system still exists. It's only now known as the foster care system. And, you know, I saw in so many of those children, I was reminded, and not in a really sad, it was just a realization that I was where these children were, and as were many of my members of not just my community, but all over. But also, there's a chance to connect with children.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can you be a little bit more specific in how you saw the link between your residential school experience and the experiences that these children had in the foster system?
Well, we were both taken away from our families. Our parents were forced, and not just my parents back then, but because of the effect of the residential school and this rupture that was caused by colonization of the family unit, these children, even though it was their parents were maybe deemed unfit to care for them anymore, that choice was still not theirs. They were in a place where they were trying to, I guess, deal with what their parents or what their grandparents went through. And so it was basically coming from the same place. And I throughout my adult life, I never wanted to, I put my memory of residential school, I put it on the shelf, and I went on to start my family, had grandkids. But I know at one morning when I was living with my daughter and then her twins, and they were getting ready to head out to school. And so grade 1, that's like 6 years old. And so they were all spiffed up, and they were standing in front of me. I was sitting on the couch, I was looking at them, and that's when it hit me that that's me. Only they're going off to school, but they're living at home with grandma and mom. But when I went my first day of school, that was it for the next while. And so it was almost like I saw myself, and it was like I had never, up until that moment, felt sorry for me as a child. And so with the work with the kids, it's tough at times, but I knew also the value of a hug, somebody praising you, and just telling you, you do have a home, even though everybody here is telling you that you don't have a home, that's why you have to be here. You do have a home. And even if your parents are no longer alive, if there's nobody in the family that is well enough to take care of you, the land is your home, and the places that you see, the Mokwants and all those places, you belong to the land. So the land is your family, and so it's just as important for like cultural learning, even just to take a drive. And that's what we would tell the caregivers, even if there's no uncles or aunties for these kids to visit, take them for a drive and let them see, let them feel, because it's a physical thing, this land, this relationship with the land. It is your home, and no matter what people do, this is still your home. That's something that I don't think a lot of people outside of our experience, I don't think a lot of people realize that physical connect to the land. So it's You know, it is really something that you don't forget, and it's something you just live with. So with the work with the youth, with those young girls, there's also, I believe, almost an innate protocol, because I knew when I met these 15 girls, like, they were considered at-risk youth. So some were not, they didn't have a place to live, but they were coming to these meetings and making this art. But when I first met them, I knew that it wasn't going to work if I came on like, oh, let's be chums, or I'll teach you how to make art, or I just had to really stay quiet and let them make an approach. So it's those things that that we know as moms and as grandmas, that you just have to be welcoming of certain things, just by being quiet sometimes, and it works. So I should be quiet right now.
That was so beautiful. I want to kind of invite you to both to expand on this idea of the land being your home, family as home, and also how art has also become a home for both of you. Anita, I remember when we first began working together, from the start, want to acknowledge that everybody in your family is an artist. And I invited you to invite somebody from your family, all of them, and you chose to work with your son, Ngozi. And then preparing for this talk, we also learned that Ngozi was with you when you were in this residency with Faye.
Right.
And I was really heartened to hear that. So I was wondering if you could both expand on this larger role of family in your artistic life, but also art in your family life, and how you negotiate being artistic matriarchs in your family, and then how these two concepts that depending on where you are in the art world, might be separate, how they come together for you.
But I don't feel like they're separate at all, and I'm really, I'm so grateful, that we share this language. That's how I describe it. It is really kind of hard to describe how, because I don't sit down and think about it a lot. It's just how we live. And, but I also want to just, before I kind of jump into all of that, I want to say that, what you said, this is still your land. It's extremely powerful to be able to visit sites here in Missouri that were important to us. And, through the Osage Nation and through like Carol's project, and this is Dr. Carol Diaz, and she had a wonderful project a few years ago related to Picture Cave. It's so very powerful to be able to come to those sites, because it wakes something within you. And you stand there and you think, we're a very small tribe, and we're pretty much all related somehow, some way, and either clan way or actual relation. And so it's not hard to go to that place of, my ancestors stood here and lived here and worked here and had their life here. And I am just a continuum of that. And so art actually plays a big role in that for us. And I don't know how my children all became artists. I know that I tried to just give them experiences. I told them, I said, I don't care if it's math, I don't care if it's science, I don't care if it's art. I said, I just want you to have a passion. And because my dad always told me, he said, you better be happy in what it is you do in your life, because he said, if you're working a job you don't really like, he said, it's going to make your life really miserable. And so, but somehow they all jumped to the arts. And I mean, because I am not a musician at all. Ngozi is a musician, and I stand there and listen to him play, and I think, how does that go through you? how do you know that? It's very beautiful. And because I'm an artist, I just can jump on and understand at least, what the motivation is, and that his need to make an expression. And my other son is a painter. My daughter is a curator and theater person. And it's so joyful to be able to have a conversation with one another about our work. It's much better to have a conversation about your work than your other issues. Because that's what we can share, very positively. And like Faye said, support each other, help each other. And so, I worked with Ngozi. This is the second time I have worked with Ngozi, who is an old-time fiddle player, but has been, ever since he was a teenager even, he did performance art. And he came to Banff with us, and because people, like if they were from like Canada, like you, this is your home, your family came in and out, but a lot of people's family was, we were there like, 6 weeks or something, and so people just took him under their wing, and, he kind of became everybody's child, and just treated him extremely well. And so, I mean, even that experience, I talk about it today, that I know that was very formative for him, because, 13 years old, that's kind of a strange time in your life, and, you're thinking, and I know it gave him confidence when he came back to think, oh my gosh, I can be anything, I can do performance art, or I can do, and it's perfectly okay. In fact, it's wonderful. I don't have to be stuck in this little town I'm in, with this thought. So I love collaborating with them, and I have, one of the really wonderful things about it is that we trust one another, and I really don't question where you are, or I'm not trying to push, I should go this way or that way. We just kind of talk about what our responsibilities we feel like within the project we're working on, what we feel like we need to take on of that. I mean, I'm not going to try to sit here and make music or a soundscape, or I have no idea how to do that. But I know that because of our relationship of mother-son, that we trust one another, and that it's kind of very easy to kind of understand what we're both thinking. And so, if I'm talking about the visual part of it, and we start discussing that, then I know that he'll kind of pick up on, this is the tone that I feel like we need to start going. And he described it himself even to a reporter here when we were installing, that it was quite emotional for him. He said, I haven't really worked, having to think that deeply about the kinds of things that I was talking about. This is our homeland, and this is, I've been doing that for a long time. But I think that that's, kind of new to him to be thinking about those things. And so he said it was quite emotional to think about what he wanted to present in terms of the closeness to nature, the closeness to the earth, the closeness to, as this is our land, even though we recognize Oklahoma as our home also. And so, I don't know what else to say. It's just how we live, I mean, I often say that I think that they were just around art so much when they were young that they picked up that language and they weren't afraid of it, that they didn't have any fear in going forward in it. Because I know it can be frightening, and when you begin as an artist, there's a lot of uncertainty. So explains it.
And maybe also just to say that what you heard at the beginning of the program was Ngozi's composition. Faye, do you want to add anything about the role that family plays in your work? And we can open it up to questions.
Well, I'm fortunate that I don't have to hire people all the time when I'm helping with the art, because I have grandchildren. I have cheap labor. No, I think it's pretty much the same with my children and grandchildren, is that Marley, my granddaughter here, her mom was still going to daycare when I started attending the art college. And so it's the same, they've been around art all the time, and I think too that it's because, because I didn't follow this formal language that was being presented to me at the art college to describe certain things that I didn't feel a part of, I turned to making art and to the actual physical material to develop a vocabulary, to develop a language. And I think families pick up on that. They know that they don't have to know about certain terms or theories of art and stuff. It's the actual doing. And so it's really, I guess, saves them that time of, I don't have to, we can just go right there, and that's where the art is. And there's no detour, and then there's no translation needed. So, and I'm really thankful for my family as well. My son is a writer, so is Marley. Marley's an educator, so is her mom is an artist. My other daughter works with, she's a teacher, and she's also worked several years with Indigenous inmates. So, and I'm really proud of my kids and my grandkids. So, and I'm thankful for their help.
We're happy to take any questions from the audience. Just raise your hand.
Anita, I would love to hear more about your relationship to this site, and given that the mound itself is not exposed and there's still residences on it, and this piece leads you towards it, but you can't go up to Sugarloaf Mound. So there's a complexity here, and both a benefit and a denial. And I just would love to hear more about your own process encountering this complicated but very special place.
So Sugarloaf Mound had like you say, a residence on top of it. And I think the one important thing, to remember about the mounds is that they're part of this erasure of history. And so it came up for sale, and the Osage Nation purchased it. I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something like that. And then they gated it because people, immediately kind of started going in there, and our cultural preservation's in Oklahoma, and they can't answer every call that comes in at 2 o'clock in the morning because somebody's trying to get into Sugarloaf Mound. And so they gated it, for protection until further plans can be made for that area. And Counterpublic is actually, very involved in the next steps in hoping to rematriate the rest of the properties that lead up to, you can tell when you look at the landscape that it's a stepped, it's not just that site, it's the residencies next to it, that there's the landscape that's stepped up into the mound. And so, I approached it very carefully and with utmost respect. And even though there was permission, sought by Counterpublic and Risa, and I still felt like I had to talk to folks at home, and just say, this is what my intentions are, and I want to make sure that this is okay with you. And that is like the cultural preservation officer and some of the elders committee, again, respectfully entering into this process. And so, because, and I had to think about it a long time because of the proximity to that space. Because we don't know exactly, that has never been excavated. So, the mound served several purposes, and we're not quite sure exactly what that particular one, the purpose was, because it hasn't been excavated ever. So, I feel like I'm getting off track, but yeah, all of these issues are extremely complex. And I feel like you just kind of have to go through each layer, each thought one at a time, to begin unraveling it. And then the sound, that is accompanied with it is, not only Ngosi's soundscape that he created, but he, is entering voices of from one of our aunts who, he was at home and he was going through my office and he found these tapes that my aunt made and her son years ago in order, she was a first speaker, and they made those tapes to encourage our language. And so he said, "Can you ask Steve if I can use her voice in this soundscape?" And I said, "Yeah." And he didn't keep up with me like every week, like this is where I'm at. I mean, it was just, here it is. So that, and then he pulled other sounds, that are familiar to us as Osage people, wanting to bring that voice in connection with the land.
I was in this space last weekend, drinking in your work, Faye, and in the entryway, I was looking at my spine, and every piece, and then came and took in this long wall here of water, and personally kind of connecting with water as a healing of my spine. And I would love it if you would speak to your time spent with water and the collection here on the wall.
What was that last part?
Connection, just to speak about this piece.
Well, it's, of course, it is a response to the experience of meeting those two rivers. Well, the one and the other, and then especially the confluence. I've always been around water, and so at different times that I've worked with different, projects that featured images of water, there's certain things that come forward more. So maybe sometimes I'll be thinking more about the fragility of river systems, about how long ago was that Yoko Ono show? Well, 3 years ago, two years ago. There's this project of Yoko Ono's, the water project. And so when it came to Calgary, which is the closest to our community, it was Indigenous artists who were invited to make a project with it. So at that time, my response was making, I used a glass bowl and water images printed on tissue, and then those were attached. And so it was very much about fragility. And then I invited Marley and her partner to go to the river and gather pebbles and stones from there. So each time it's a different, it's just like the river itself. I mean, it can never stop making, or it can never stop inspiring different thoughts about it. And even the experience here of this work going up, it was really about community, because the team here, when we were meeting for all throughout that year, it was some of it was technical. How are we going to make this frame that attaches? But each time there was always something that was offered by someone. So it's like you said, it is more than one person that adds to the work. And I'm really happy that the images I've been seeing is of people spending time with that. And, each one is going to, come away with something different. I enjoyed what you said about healing. So that's true.
Maybe we can just close by offering you to the final word, and just if there's anything you want to share or add, or about your experience here or being together again after a few years.
Well, I have to say, Anita, that it's, like we went out for pizza last night, and it was, no kidding, like how many years ago that we last saw each other, but we were just sitting and telling stories about family, laughing. It was just like sitting at a kitchen table with no time had passed, and I think that's, that's what, having a relative, that's how you feel. That's how I feel, and seeing your work, it's a thrill.
Yeah, I was really excited when, first of all, when I knew that you had an exhibit up here and I was going to be here, and this is kind of before this, the other things began. And I think I asked the question, is Faye going to be there? And then this, kind of conversation started happening. So I'm really grateful for you all to bring us together. And we said last night, I think it was just meant to be.
Yes.
So I think, one thing that we talked about earlier when we were kind of discussing the order of things for now was as artists, as women artists, as native women artists, you don't know that many people that are right from your own community who are involved in the arts. Everybody's an artist at home. Everybody creates. Everybody makes their Indian clothes. Everybody helps the community, make everything that is needed in order for you to participate. But there's not a whole lot of women that can relate to you kind of on the level when we're talking about the kinds of things that we're talking about today. And kind of jokingly said, well, you can maybe oftentimes even be seen as very, very odd. So it's really wonderful to be able to know, someone of my age and be able to share those experiences that way, because they are, very a commonality for us as Native women. The kinds of things we're talking about, family and community and, what inspires you. So I'm very grateful to be able to be reunited.
We're also grateful that you're here, and thank you so much for coming here today.